Good morning, everyone. All right, I'm going to review this morning's trades. Starting with the pre-market analysis. I didn't do any because I rolled out of bed 1 minute before market open. So, started out this morning very rushed, quickly charted out all my major pivots overhead, which are these. Now, obviously, when you take a quick look at the charts, we are bullish. You can see ES just kind of barely missed this one. Not barely, but it missed it. So my initial sentiment kind of out of the gate, despite supply and despite us making higher highs on NQ, I was leaning rather bullish. Um, I do need most of this pullback to invalidate though. If that happens, I'm going to be able to take advantage of upside. And if we drop, I don't really have a plan for that just yet. But you can see we're kind of chopping down into a falling wedge in the open. So here's the first candle market open. It is super bullish. It is super bullish. NQ is much, much stronger than ES, as you can see, right? ES had a huge selling wick. NQ did not. Very bullish. Now this candle happens on NQ, and you can see again how much stronger NQ is than ES. So this is when I'm pretty set on hopping into calls. Now, I want to see how the next candle opens. And I did end up filling on the next candle. The next candle opened roughly red, and I did take a fill. Now, I have to be half size, though, because like it or not, NQ's still on a potential pivot. We're still against supply. It's not unlikely that we pull back. But if you look at the strength and weakness analysis here, NQ's so much stronger than ES. I don't really see ES pulling back more than this level here. And I don't even know if it's going to do that for sure. Right, but what I do know is NQ is super strong in line with my bias and looks pretty good for this pivot up here. So I end up entering half size on this candle. I didn't end up getting the best fill. I filled at like 68 cents. The candle finished at like 64 cents, honestly. It wasn't very good. But anyways, I filled roughly here. And this was pretty much the trade setup. Now I can't average down until I think I filled a little bit higher, somewhere up here. I don't know. I was waiting for ES to hit this pivot to average down. When it hits that pivot, I will take my average down. Remember, I did enter with half size on purpose, and I would have averaged up on this trade if this pullback invalidated and we got pretty much the high of day. So it goes either way. But I'm waiting for ES to hit this buy side pivot to take my average down, add my second half. NQ looks so good on that candle. Fully invalidated the red candle, confirmed its strength once again. Looked really nice. And then I took my ad on this candle. Right when ES hit this pivot, I did take my ad, added my second half to this trade, which I thought would bring my average roughly down to here. Now the contracts did end up chopping. I filled my average down at 55 cents. The dollar cost average was 61 cents. Now, obviously, my initial PT was up here, but now I'm kind of just looking for a new high of day, and then I trim a bunch and then leave the rest for this pivot. So we would just have to see how that ends up going. We did end up exploding to the upside. I accidentally fast forwarded there. So we caught a nice bounce. NQ unfortunately did end up flipping weaker here than ES, which makes sense because ES is the one that swept buy side liquidity. NQ did not. And you can see on this green candle, ES has a big green candle, NQ does not. But the next candle was huge. I actually added SPX calls on this. So now I'm in QQQ calls, and I'm also in SPX calls. Now I did trim some QQQ calls off the next candle, right? Because I said this was a major trim point. But the bigger reason was just so risk management, right? I was in a full-size QQQ trade. I didn't want to be in a full-size SPX trade as well. So I entered roughly half, I think a little bit more than half size on SPX. And then I also trimmed down QQQ. So I was a little bit more than one full-size trade leveraged in this just general at this time. But it wasn't nothing that I can't stop out of. So, but I did end up filling SPX calls here. I filled the 6045 calls at $2.45. Now that was the alert price. That's the price I initially filled at. However, I did add on the way up. So we did end up kind of cruising up. This is the candle that I trimmed a decent amount of QQQ on. I got roughly 20-ish% gains, like 20 to 25% gains is what I trimmed a lot of that on. And at this point, I had roughly like a third of my position left on the NASDAQ because I'm pretty bullish for this. Unfortunately, NQ did end up flipping a lot weaker than ES, but ES got to, well, almost got to my pivot or my PT, right? It touched my pivot, but I always look for pivots to sweep by at least one tick, right? So this is now a perfect double top. And you guys know me. I am very bullish or bearish for I'm very bullish for perfect double tops to break and double or triple bottoms to break as well. Statistically speaking, obviously there is a chance this doesn't break, but that's unlikely, and all my trades are likely. So I called out that I am bullish on dips on ES, and this was a dip, and I did end up adding back to SPX calls here. Not adding back, I never really trimmed any. But I did add. No, I did. I did trim a little bit of SPX calls when we got new high of day, but I did add to SPX here. We had the perfect double top. We pulled back. It's always a pretty decent gamble. So now I was pretty much full size on SPX now, and I did end up filling right around my average. I think I filled at like 2.5. I entered down here at 2.45. So in this case, the chop actually helped me. And now NQ flipped strong. So remember, I only trimmed roughly 2/3 of the position for 20-ish%. Now it's looking pretty good. We've gotten up to like 30 something percent now. Let me see. Yeah, like 31% is what we hit right here. But, I trimmed 2/3 for 20%. I'm looking for these PTs now. I want these sell side pivots. ES hits, NQ does not hit. That's a big trim on ES though, or on SPX, I should say. Got 3.1 at 26% gains there. So big trim there, only a runner position left. SPX hits my next PT, ends up going even higher. But unfortunately, NQ ends up pulling back. Now, I almost stopped out on this candle. Keep in mind, I still have, kind of a very small runner position on SPX calls, and I still have that 1/3 left in QQQ. Well, I almost stopped out on this candle, but it got buying wick in a green candle. So I ended up holding off. But if this green candle invalidates, I will stop out. And it did invalidate, I believe, on this candle, but quickly put in a buying wick, so I decided to wait. Well, we ended up kind of popping back up, and I'm pretty bullish if we invalidate this entire red candle. And I'm also really bullish on ES if we invalidate this entire red candle, because a lot of shorts entered. And if we invalidate that entire red candle, that's going to be very indicative of an incoming short squeeze. But here's the problem. NQ is currently a head and shoulders pattern at the moment. So I can't just hold these calls forever. Plus, they're chopping a lot. My average is around 61 cents, like 61.5, I think it actually was, but right somewhere around 61 cents. That's a head and shoulders. However, head and shoulders so often turn into falling wedges, but I can't stick around to find out because contracts are chopping. So, unlike futures, I can't just put a stop loss here and forget about it. I have to be out if this bounce invalidates, because if this bounce invalidates again, that is a confirmed head and shoulders formation. I have to be out. And if it does end up coming back up, I will just re-enter. Is that going to let me delete it? Yep. Okay, cool. And I'm still in SPX. So we end up going a little bit more up. And I actually add SPX calls on this green candle here at 7:01 my time. The same thing that would have caused me to add on QQQ, I added on SPX. So I did take a heavy trim, but now I was back in with decent size. Not big size or anything, but back in with decent size on SPX. Just super bullish. I mean, look at the strength and weakness analysis. ES is so much stronger than NQ and validated pretty much that entire drop. All NQ has to do is bounce, put in a small bounce or bounce a little bit harder, and ES looks like it wants a short squeeze. But unfortunately, I believe it was on this candle I stopped out. I did get an okay fill. I stopped out right when the head and shoulders formed, so roughly here. And I filled that at, what did I stop that at? I'm trying to look for it right now. I stopped the last at 46 cents. So the highest it got to was 31 cents. But I stopped out the last at 46 cents, which I didn't do math. Hang on, I'll do my math real quick. So I stopped out for roughly 25 minus 25% on the last third. Now I trimmed roughly 2/3 for only plus 20%. And they did get to 30%, but I didn't sell there because I wasn't PT. So I actually finished that trade very, very small green, unfortunately. Now, I did say though, if we come back up, I'm gonna enter, right? Because now I'm watching this falling wedge, and look how strong SPX is by the ES is by the way. My SPX calls are looking actually pretty decent. I'm red on my Riyadh right now, but it actually looks pretty decent. And then here you go. We get a bullish piercing line candle on the NASDAQ. You can see it forming, happens all the time. That's why you always got to be ready for it, especially if it's putting in a head and shoulders and you have bullish bias, which is it barely missing a pivot, which is a really big deal. You got to be ready for it, and I was. So nice falling wedge here. And right here, I said I'll read it directly from my channel. Give me one moment. One moment. I said, I personally think NQ is more likely to squeeze to not new high of day. It just needs a couple, I meant to say one or two, but it just needs a couple decent green candles first, right? Pretty much, I am bullish for it to squeeze to new high of day, and you guys can check my channel. The timestamps are there. I just need that selling wick to invalidate right here. I don't care if that happens in two little decent green candles or one big green candle. I need this to invalidate. This selling wick invalidates, that's enough to actually trigger me back in, because the head and shoulders is fully invalidated at that point, and the falling wedge is now validated. ES, on the other hand, ES is looking nice and strong, so if this happens on NQ, ES is going to freaking fly. We get a really nice candle on ES, and the next candle opens green. I fill early on that next candle. Within the first 20 seconds of the candle, I fill when the selling wick invalidates. Early on the trade. So I filled at 88 cents. This massive candle happened, and I averaged up during this candle right here. Because remember what I said earlier, I averaged up here on SPX because the huge red candle invalidated. Well, when that huge red candle invalidated on the NASDAQ, I made a riskier but discretionary decision. A riskier discretionary decision, but I think it actually had great odds, which is why I did it. I actually averaged up on the candle as well. Obviously, I alerted that. I said early entry, average up on this huge candle, and then I said snipe the fill, which I did. My ad on that was roughly at like $1. So I entered at 88 cents. My ad was at roughly $1-ish because it popped so hard. I don't think I actually got a very good fill. But it actually ended up working out because now, with how hard we're popping, now I have to think. And keep in mind, I added on SPX, so I have a decent position in that as well. Here's my next PT up here, and I have a cluster of pivots here. And my next PT on NQ is up here. That's what I'm looking for. And we end up getting there just fine. I sold the rest when ES got to this pivot. Got 136% gains on the initial SPX entry at 2.45. Now, obviously, my percentage gains was less because I averaged up. Same thing on the NASDAQ. The QQQ calls got 69% gains, but mine was a bit less because I averaged up. But more money, and that's what matters. I called it here. You know, all my pivots hit. I was still bullish, though, but I'm not one that just kind of blindly holds runners. And you know, when we put in this red candle, I cut my last runner. So, very green morning. And my sentiment was just a matter of momentum analysis, you know? The big thing, and I'll go back real quick just to make it clear, because I had some people ask, why were you bullish today? Well, I was bullish initially because the pre-market analysis. We had some major pivots overhead, and the pre-market trend was strong. Strong pre-market trend. Nice pivots overhead. And then I'm bullish here because the majority of the drop invalidated and we made lower lows, which happened here on NQ. And then I was bullish here on this dip because we had the perfect double top. And then I had to flip bearish here because the head and shoulders, but not because I was bearish overall, just bearish because I had to get out of the trade. But then I reflipped bullish here and here on ES. Here on NQ because the perfect, picture perfect falling wedge, and I already had bullish bias because we barely missed this sell side liquidity sweep here. And when you barely miss a pivot, it's fairly likely to go back for it, right? Because most major rejections happen in either supply demand or pivot, and a lot of times it's both. And this would have been both. So it missed this pivot, which already gave me bullish bias for this drop, despite me having to stop out. There's nothing I can do about it. But also we had this falling wedge here with a bullish piercing line, signaling a reversal. And then on top of that, with the SPX ad, we did invalidate that large red candle, which again is the exact same type of liquidity and momentum analysis that made me bullish here when we initially, 8 minutes after market open, when we ended up popping up. So 3 different distinct periods this morning of my bullishness. Every single period resulted in me adding calls, whether it was entering for the first time or adding more to them. And yeah, all by the same, all from the same analysis, just liquidity, momentum analysis, and pattern analysis for falling wedge. And obviously there was a lot of strength and weakness in there this morning. So yeah, that was my morning. It was a great morning. Very happy with the results. Obviously did continue running quite a ways. Those calls, I documented them getting to 5.9. Those calls got to $11. So they went almost 5x, like they went like 4x. Obviously though, if I held, it would have been a single call, and I don't do that because, it's very rare that your calls are going to go that high, and you're going to just lose more money. If you always hold, trying to catch the huge moves, trying to always have a position on the table. Yes, when it hits like days like today, it's going to be very nice, but it's not going to hit most of the time, and most of the time you're going to give back a lot of your gains. But we did end up running quite a ways, so that is awesome. We did get a beautiful supply rejection here on NQ. Looks like ES missed supply though. But all right, that was my morning. I don't really have anything else to talk about. Pretty straightforward, just riding the wave this morning. Does anyone have any questions regarding any of my analysis? No, everyone's good? All right, sweet. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this recording. I will ping you guys when it is done. And yeah, if you guys need anything, feel free to reach out. You guys know where to find me on Discord. And yeah, good luck if you guys continue to trade. I'll see you guys later.